Hey everybody, JP here, and this video is going to be a little different. We're going to make some noise later on, but first we're going to go through some of these studio notes from the Load SuperDeluxe box set. And I mean, these 4 pages of notes are like a treasure trove for an audio engineering geek like me, and probably like you as well if you're still listening. There is so many little nuggets in here, things that, despite all the interviews with band members, things you never heard of before. And I only wish there were more of it. I would buy a whole book of this if I could. So I do have to apologize. I was only able to enlarge things so much on the computer before they got pixelated. I actually used a magnifying glass to read some of this stuff because it just, you couldn't zoom in close enough, high enough resolution to get it any better. So you're going to have to trust me. I have my own notes that I took while doing that in front of me, and I'm going to kind of go over them while I have these up on the screen for you all to look at. All right. So first of all, I got to say, these might be the most meticulous tracking notes I've ever seen. I mean, when I was an assistant engineer, note taking was like probably the most important part of the job. Basically note taking and getting out of the way are the two most important things about being an assistant engineer. I've never seen tracking notes that are this thorough. It also does appear that most of these notes are in Randy Staub's handwriting. We can spot the handwriting because he did release mix notes from an Evanescence mix that he did in like 2010 in a Sound on Sound magazine article. Go check them out if you haven't. Very cool stuff. So for an engineer to take his own notes like this that's just an extent of meticulousness that I've never seen. Normally you let an assistant do that. And not to say that he didn't trust his assistants. He very well may have. He just maybe really wanted to have this written his own way for himself. It's very possible. I want to start with this mic input list. Now, a mic input list is, essentially where the mics in the live room are plugged into. So, you've got your kick drum mic, it goes into, wall input number 1 out in the live room. And then, on the patch bay, then you patch it into whatever, it's sort of your flow chart, right, for inputs. So we've got a mic input list, then we've got a bus routing list. And the bus routing list tells us where those input channels were submixed down to and where they were sent to tape for the tracking. So those are the 2 things I want to start with. And there's a lot of cool drum stuff. I know somebody asked me in the comments on the Load guitar video if I could talk about drums. And, I really didn't know how to go about that, but now I do. There's a lot of drum stuff in here. So if you're curious about that, you're going to be pretty happy. So let's just take a look at this list. The first mic inputs we see are for the kick drums. We've got kick 1 and 2. Each one has an RE20 and a 421 in it, and they're both being patched into Neve 1081 pre's. And then I would assume from there going into the SSL, where they would eventually be submixed down before going to tape. But if we go further down, we see that there's a couple of additional 421s on the kicks, also going through the Neves. And then even further, we've got kick room mics 1 and 2. And those are U47s. I would assume tube 47s, usually 47 FETs would be written like 47 with an F. So if it's written U47, I'm going tube 47 in my mind. And if we look over to this diagram, you can see that's the kick drum with 3 mics inside, the big RE20 over here, and a pair of 421s. There's some other writing on, I guess that's additional. I can't quite make out what that says, but I would assume that the additional 421s were added later on since they're further down the input list. So they probably just weren't completely happy with what they were getting from the original 2 mics. So they added a third to compensate for something in there. And then 37.5 inches from the front head, we've got the U47 placement. And then here's looking inside. This would be every measurement you could imagine from the outer edge, from the top. I mean, Randy really covered all of his bases here. Really, really cool stuff. So next on our list after that, we've got 2 snare top mics. Let's find our snare. There it is. So the 2 snare top mics were the same as the Black Album, 57 and a Neumann KM86. The KM86 is the same condenser element as a KM84, except it's side address. And if you've seen Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica, like I would imagine most of you probably have, that mic is very visible on the snare drum, whereas the 57 is kind of hidden the way they have it placed on that album. So here again, every measurement you can imagine, a little tough to read, but you could make them out really well. And then on the diagram, we've got a snare bottom mic, which looks to be an AKG 460, if I can make that out correctly. That's further down. Actually, you really can't even see it on the input list. It's at the very bottom, and it's partially blocked. But that's in there, and you know the phase would be flipped on the bottom of that. So back on our input list, we've got some cymbal spot mics starting to pop up. We've got a Splash with a 414 on it. Looks like he's got the pads. Looks like probably a -10 pad. That's really tough to see. And I would imagine a low frequency roll off. Toms. Now, this is really cool. I can't wait to try this out myself, what I learned from the toms here. So he's got the floor toms first, and they've got a 421 on top, and it looks like a 57 on the bottom going into a Y cable. So the way the Y cable works with these, let's find our toms. Here we go. So here's our floor tom. That's what we're talking about first. 421s on top, 57s. You can barely see them here, but they're down the bottom. With these custom-made Y cables, Brendan O'Brien is a fan of this, as well as Bob Rock. You wire these cables so that the bottom mic is, the XLR is wired out of phase relative to the top mic. What that does is it sends both the top and bottom mic into the same preamp input, which is great if you have more mics than preamps at your disposal. In this case, I don't think that was the issue. Both Bob and Brendan O'Brien have talked about how much they love the sound, the way that the mics mix together, because it's a 50-50 mix. You have no control over that with this Y cable method. So you're getting an equal amount of top and bottom mics, but they sort of self-EQ themselves in a really cool way. And man, if anybody's interested in me doing a video on this, I think it's something I may do in the future. So let me know if this is something you want to check out, and we can talk about doing this either with a Y cable or like the Whirlwind mic combiner box. Those are great for this. I think it's worth doing a video on. I'm not sure if there's anything like that out there. But anyhow, so that's just the floor mics we talked about. Now for the rack toms, we're using different mics. We're using Sennheiser 409s on top and 421s on the bottom. And again, they're drawn out pretty accurately. Those definitely look like 421s on the bottoms. And 409s are a very cool mic that was discontinued quite a while. At some point in the 90s, I believe they were discontinued because a certain material that was used in the dynamic element wasn't available anymore. So Sennheiser couldn't make them the same way. So then the current one is the 609. I have one of those. They're cool, but not exactly the same. There's something really unique about those old 409s. They're great on guitar. They're fantastic on toms. And they have a low profile. So especially on rack toms, you can get them right above the drums in a very cool way. He's got the 409s up top with the 421s on the bottom. So I would imagine he really liked the way that those frequencies work together when being combined. Same with the 421s on the floor toms and the 57s on the bottom. And then if you keep going down the list, we have, I believe this says flat toms 1 and 2. And these both appear to be U87s. Now, I've never seen mics in this position. If we look over here at the diagram, here's one of them. It's a U87 pointed downward. We've got the distance from the snare measured and the distance from each rack tom mic. And on the floor tom diagram, we have distance from the floor and the distance from each microphone. So I have no idea what these sound like. I did a little digging, and I did find a picture of Lars' drum kit mic'd up for, it was from 1998, so I think it was from Garage Inc. And they still had these mics in that picture. So whatever they were doing, it was something they liked. They liked it enough to do it again a few years later. So yeah, this is something that, you know, someday if I have the opportunity, I definitely want to try out. All right, getting back to our list. Oh, if I didn't mention it, all those tom mics are going through Neve 1081s as well. Oh, Rockhead kick. Okay, so this is fun. This is a sample. It looks like it came out of a DM4, I think that says, an Alesis sample trigger. That was probably out in the live room, hooked up to Lars's kick drums. So Rockhead was a band that Bob Rock had in the early 90s. They released their debut album, I think their only album, in 92. And it didn't really do anything. I mean, grunge had already kind of started up by then, and his album had more of an 80s vibe to it. It reminded me a lot of a Blue Murder album that Bob produced, actually, with John Sykes on guitar. In fact, it's worth looking up the video for the single Bed of Roses, and you can see Bob Rock doing a pretty decent John Sykes impression in that video, which I always get a kick out of. So why would samples be on the input list when usually that's something that comes during the mixing process? Probably because Lars wanted to hear the samples in his headphones when he was recording drums. That is pretty common for metal drummers. When I worked with Anthrax, Charlie Benanti had his D-drum rack hooked up next to him with triggers on his kick drums so that he could sort of get that consistency from samples while he was playing. And it kept him from maybe pushing a little too hard with his feet, while performing. So I would imagine something similar was happening for Lars there. We can't tell from this if it was used on the final album or not. I wouldn't put it past blending samples in with live kick mics, but who knows? Yeah, this was probably, since it's on the input list, that means it's coming from the live room. And yeah, I think that's just for monitoring purposes, probably just going to Lars's headphones, and that's all. We've got more cymbal spot mics, a lot of 451s in here. High overheads. These are sort of your main two left to right overheads. U87s. But then we've got mid-room mics, those like 67s, and then far room 87s. We've got some PZM room mics, kind of up against the walls. That was a pretty fun thing to do. You kind of find a spot somewhere in the room and throw one of them on it. We've got some of James' tent mics down here. But again, these were most likely just scratch tracks. Anytime you see the band playing live in the room with an input list like this, the drums were the focus. The guitar and the bass, the guys would have their live rigs next to them and the cabs would be ISO'd and they'd go to tape. But really the idea was to get the drum tracks down. And then once you start editing those drum tracks on tape, those scratch tracks become meaningless at that point, because when you're editing the drums, you're not really paying attention to what's happening on the scratch tracks, right? So they're getting chopped up and pretty useless after that. So, you're going to go back, refine your sounds, overdub later on. And we know the pains that they went through for that on the Black Album in particular. And I'm sure Load was no different. I don't know how much drum editing was done on Load, but, that was kind of a hallmark of Metallica, at least from Justice and the Black Album onward. The drum editing was pretty fierce on all that stuff. So, we've also got a C24 room mic, and actually in the diagram, he's actually got the angle of the mic stand displayed here. I mean, just again, incredible detail. But the C24 is a very sensitive mic. It's a stereo microphone. I think it costs about 25 grand these days. Frankly, that was always a very expensive mic. Oh, looking at this is a great one too. These are all the cymbal spot mics. These are all the little 451s on the cymbals all throughout the drum kit. And I actually found a picture of Lars's kit from the Load sessions from above. So you can kind of look at the diagram and compare it to the actual picture and see what's going on there. I think that's really cool. I guess the next thing we can look at from here is the tape input list, bus routing. A couple interesting things right off the bat on the bus routing. All the tom mics, well, we know that the top and bottom mics all go to, one mic preamp. So they're being basically mixed right off the bat with each other. Then all four toms are being mixed down to stereo tracks on tape. So you're not getting four tracks for the toms, you're just getting, left and right tracks with the array of toms panned out through that spectrum, however they saw fit. And we've got API 550B EQs across that tom bus going to tape. Then we've got, that's actually where the GML EQ is on the overhead. So we've got the overhead bus. Again, we don't know exactly how all those individual cymbal mics were blended with the overhead mics. We don't know if the The room mics were all blended to their own pair as well. That's just something that, you know, we can only go with what we know, right? So now this is the part that actually really cracked me up. We've got kick 1 and kick 2. So for each kick drum, its respective microphones all mixed together the way Bob and Randy saw fit. And then we've got them going out to Clark Technic DN360 graphic EQs. Now, why does this make me chuckle? Because there was a story going back to the Injustice for All mixes with Steve Thompson and Michael Barbiero. I heard this from Michael Barbiero when I worked with him, and Steve Thompson has since said it publicly in interviews, that, you know, when they were working on the drum sound, they got a drum sound and Lars walked in the room and said, no, that's not my drum sound. Here's my drum sound. And he handed them a Polaroid of his Clark Technic graphic EQs from his live rack and said, this is how I want my drums to sound. Steve Thompson thought he was joking. He couldn't believe Lars was showing him these, you know, cheap graphic EQs and saying, do this with my kicks. But got to hand it to Lars, even though the Injustice for All kicks were really unique for the time, they influenced pretty much the next 2 decades of, you know, heavy metal drumming. So yeah, props to him for that. And then when I was looking at some of the pictures of the load tracking sessions, in fact, I think it's a picture I used in my guitar video, you can see the rack. It's next to James's rack when he's standing out in the room playing. And it's, I believe it's the rack from Metallica's live rig with Clark Technic graphic EQs, and you can see a Polaroid taped to it. And I'm wondering if that's the same freaking Polaroid that he showed Steve Thompson on Injustice for All. So anyway, that was like a full circle thing that just made me laugh hysterically when I saw it here. Moving on, we've got some bass stuff. We've got Jason's DI, which was, I believe he said he used an Evil Twin DI, and I've been looking for an Evil Twin for years. So if anybody out there happens to have an Evil Twin DI that you're looking to sell, please talk to me. But they ran it through a DBX 165A compressor. And another funny note about that, when I was in college for sound engineering, my school didn't have much. They've since renovated, and they have a beautiful studio now with an SSL, yada, yada. Back when I was there, we were basically rubbing sticks together trying to make fire. And the only 2 compressors we had were a pair of DBX 165As. So you learn how to make those work for everything when they're the only thing you have. And I just think it's so cool that out of everything they could have possibly used, they ended up using a 165A. It makes me want to find a good plug-in version of that for myself, mess around with again. And we've got some partial settings here. We've got a Mesa M2000 head, some settings from that. We've got, that looks like part of an Ampeg SVT right there. We've also got Marshall dynamic bass system. That was a big part of his sound. We've got a GK800, partial settings from that as well. And we've got some diagrams of the room. Jason, some of his bass gear shared James' Tent of Doom. Or it was in the same room as it. It didn't really in the tent, but, you know, I think he might have gone through some guitar cabinets that were in the tent, but, you know, he had some bass gear like adjacent to it in Studio 2 or Studio B, as well as the SVT was over in Studio A. So we've got some floor plan sketches of all that stuff. Speaking of the Tent of Doom, we've got a diagram, not the easiest to read, but we've got a little diagram of the tent just to show you that. And we do have some Polaroids of James' cabinets and how they're mic'd up. Mostly 57s and 421s. He seems to really like the 421s off axis and the 57s on axis. And actually on my load guitar video, that's what I did for the main tri-axis tracks. Actually, after seeing them in these notes, I gave that a shot last week. And it made a big difference. It made it, brought something out, even just in the cab sim on that Nembrini plugin, brought out a frequency that I could hear very clearly in the stem track. So yeah, I thought that was really cool. Also looks like the only room mic in the tent was an AKG C12. I believe it was a U87, Neumann U87 on the Black Album. So looks like it was a C12 for the load guitars. So yeah, I wish we had more on Hetfield's guitars here, but this is really just about it. For Kirk, we have a partial shot of one of his lead guitar splitter situations. So it's 58 bursts Les Paul going into a GCX ground control splitter. I don't think that existed for the Black Album. I think they were using the Terry Manning Deceiver box, which was kind of rare and boutique-y back in '91 for that. So if you look at this, you can see that like one feed from the ground control is going to Bob Rock's Jose Marshall. That's on the left there. Then I think the next one it is going down to the Matchless Spitfire. Again, that amp got a lot of use. Look at that. We've got his 88 MP1 and MEQ1 rack rig, which, you know, he'd been playing since, I think, the Justice era. So that's making a return here. And he's got a Strategy 400 power amp into some cabinets for that. And then I can't quite make out the rest. I see C+ written, and it's actually spelt out PLUS. So I got to think that that's, you know, a Mesa C+. Very possible one of James' Mark II C+'s found its way into Kirk's tracks. These guys were kind of sharing everything. Let's see. Kirk's guitar. This looks like it was from Moldy, which was the working title for Hero of the Day. So we've got Matchless Spitfire, which we know he's mentioned they used. But we've got MXR, Equalizer. We've got some, looks like a Tweed Deluxe. I don't think that's a Fender Tweed Deluxe, but you know, it's some kind of like a boutique-y version of it. Then, oh, this is the 2x4 stuff. This is really cool. Marshall Bluesbreaker with a Coles 4038 ribbon on it for the solo in 2x4 bridge solo, it looks like. And then we've also got a Vox AC30 being used for that. I remember him mentioning the AC30, but I don't remember the Bluesbreaker being mentioned. And then looks like some more Matchless Spitfire action going on for that. The Spitfire seemed to be a really popular amp on this album, as they were really experimenting with some different tones. And also kind of funny that there's one page that has partial settings for a Randall Century 200, which is the Dimebag Darrell amp. Although it does say DNU, which is did not use. So it didn't actually end up making the album, or at least making that track. But I thought that was kind of funny. And also above it on that same sheet is the Dumble Steel String Singer that I think belonged to Stevie Ray that Kirk bought. And but I think it was broken. I think there was some issues with that particular amp. So that also has a DNU on it for that particular track. So now this takes us to stuff I really want to get into. We've basically got one full guitar sound diagrammed on this page, and it's from the song Bleeding Me. You can see Boss written here. Boss was the working title for Bleeding Me. So I knew it wasn't the main sound from Bleeding Me because that has the MXR Phase 100 on it. It's actually the alternate sound. So that main riff is on the left side, and this is on the right side. And Kirk actually plays it live, but James played it in the studio, at least if these notes are to be believed. Now, I know Kirk has mentioned using the Roland VG8 guitar synth on this album for some of the from strings and organ parts. And you know, the Roland had a little MIDI pickup that you'd have to install under the bridge of your guitar, and it transferred your notes into MIDI, and then you could, you know, program it like a synthesizer, right? And it was really ahead of its time in terms of sound quality. I remember messing around. I don't think it was the VG8. They made like a less expensive version that I played around with in, like, you know, Sam Ash once, and I really thought it was cool. But this is news that James actually used it, and there's a picture of that Roland MIDI pickup mounted to his #1 recording guitar, the Explorer that he's been using since like 1987. So I thought that was really, really wild. Did not expect to see that. And then we've got this wonderful breakdown of the signal chain, which we're going to try to recreate. So let's talk about the signal chain first. Here you see a little sketch of the Explorer, I would assume done by Randy. We see that, you know, we've got the bridge pickup, volume and tone full, and we've also got the Roland pickup going to the VG8 separately there. So let's talk about the regular guitar output. So this goes into a Morley AB pedal, which splits the signal. One side of it is going to a Rotovibe, Dunlop Rotovibe. Again, something I had no idea they used on this album. I know Kirk had a Univibe at this point in time, And I think I remember him saying it was like too noisy to use on some of the more delicate parts. So anyway, maybe that's why they used a Rotovibe. So we've got a Rotovibe here, and that is going into James JC120, which is being mic'd in stereo because the JC120, when you enable the chorus on it, the chorus only comes out of one speaker. The other speaker stays dry. So when you're standing in front of the amp, it's always a 50-50 mix that you're hearing between the chorus and non-chorus signal. So you mic them both. He's got a little XY pattern with a pair of KM84s in front of them there. That way you can control the blend. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be spread left and right on the mix, but now you can control the mix of chorus versus non-chorus sound. Of course, we don't know the mix they used, but we know they at least mic both speakers. We've also got the settings of that amp, as well as the other half of that AB signal, which goes into an MXR Dynacomp pedal. Again, I know Bob and Randy are big Dynacomp fans. I really wish I had done my Black Album clean guitar video first, because you'd see the evolution of like the Enter Sandman, Nothing Else Matters clean guitar sound into some of this more experimental stuff from Load. But we'll just have to do that backwards, that's all. So we've got MXR Dynacomp going into James's Tweed Twin. Now, this is a whole other thing that hadn't been used before. James has what appears to be a high-powered Tweed Twin, which was a 5F8 circuit, if you're familiar with Fender Tweed circuits. All of the Fender Tweeds throughout the 50s are a constant evolution in circuits. And the 5F8 Tweed Twin, I believe, was the last one that they did before then they transitioned into would have been the blonde and brown Tolex covering. The way I know that that's a high-powered Tweed Twin is because it was a little wider than the low-powered Twin. The low-powered Twin, the speakers were offset slightly diagonally. The high-powered Tweed, the speakers were symmetrical next to each other. So it needed a few more inches for that. And also it had a few extra screws holding the baffle in place. And I believe you could see those two screws on either side of the nameplate right there. So that's my vintage guitar expert opinion on that. Very different circuits though, despite sharing the same name. The low-powered Twin was actually really similar to the Tweed Bandmaster, Pro, and Super amps. Whereas the high-powered Tweed Twin was actually an evolution of the Tweed Bassman amp. Although the Bassman was about 40 watts and had a 4x10 cabinet, the high-powered Twin was 80 watts with 2x12 speakers. And that was mic'd up with a 452, an AKG 452, which is very similar to a 451. In fact, I think it's essentially the same mic element. 452 needed exactly 48 volts, and the 451 could operate on a wide range of phantom power voltage, if I'm remembering that correctly. That's the only real difference. Probably ran out of 451s because they were all over the freaking drums. And also a U87 right there. So that takes care of the analog part of that signal. Now we've got the VG8 synth. It looks like they have a direct box for it, as well as running it into the matchless Spitfire amp. The Spitfire was like a small, kind of like an AC-15 style amp. The interesting thing about that is that the speaker is not mic'd. What they did was ran the 8-ohm output to a Maestro Rover rotating speaker. Now, the Maestro Rover was something I was not familiar with until now, and I did a bit of short research. Remember, when you're teaching, you only have to stay a day ahead of the class, right? So the Maestro Rover is a very unique rotating speaker. It was basically Gibson's answer to the Fender Vibertone rotating speaker, which was designed for guitarists. And the Maestro had two inputs. It had an instrument input, so you could use the amplifier built into it, or it had an amp input, so you could take the output of a guitar amp, like the Matchless, and run it into there, and then use the rotating speakers basically with an external amp. So that's what was done here. The Rover was driven by the Matchless Spitfire at 8 ohms. And the Rover was mic'd in stereo with KM84s, similar to the JC120. And all of the mic pre's for these guitars actually are SSL mic ends. They did not use the Neves like Like I kind of figured they would have. I guess the Neves were probably all tied up with heavy guitars, or they just liked the maybe the less colored sound of the SSL mic-ins for the guitars. Anyhow, I thought that was pretty interesting. So now we're going to try to recreate this guitar tone, and we have the settings on this sheet. Is really tough to read, but you can see that we've got JC120 settings, James Tweed Twin settings, and Spitfire settings. Although you could actually kind of see them on the picture as well. And we've got Maestro settings, but we don't have an actual Maestro. So we're going to improvise as far as that goes. All right, so first, why don't we just take a listen to the original here. So that's the sound we're shooting for. I'm just going to pan it center. And now let's start breaking down. Kill all this to start. So this is one part. I did it this way. I thought it'd be a little easier to see visually. I recorded the part once right here with my Flying V EMG 81 in the bridge. Now, imagine that going into an AB box, and the first side of it is going to be the Dynacomp. Getting a bit of a boost from that Dynacomp, the way the settings showed it. And then that is going into, thank you Amplitude for not crashing. There is a dearth of good Tweed plugins out there, I gotta say. There's a million Tweed Deluxes. There are no high-powered Tweed Twin plugins that I could find. So I ended up going with a Bassman plugin because, again, same preamp, same power amp as the Tweed Twin, just less power ultimately. And I ended up using a 212 cabinet as well for it. So it's about as close as I could get in plugin land. And we followed the settings here. And I followed the mic settings as much as I could. I didn't have a 452, so I'm going with a 414 in place of that. But I think they sound pretty good. And I like the chime that I'm getting from this. And it's a nice contrast to James's normal clean sound, which so Nembrini Jazz Chorus amp, great plugin. The settings used here are a bit different than James's normal clean sound. The treble is turned down a bit, the bass is cranked, which I thought was a bit shocking. And if you have a very keen eye, you may notice that mic controls for the chorus are not set the same way. There's a reason for that. Story time, as if this video is not long enough. The chorus in the original JC120 combos, I don't know what they're like these days, but the old ones, the chorus settings were fixed. When you turned on the chorus, it was chorus. Some later versions had an adjustable trim in the back for the chorus, but it really wasn't like a depth or speed. I guess it was like the intensity control on the pedal, maybe, like the CE1 pedal. But anyhow, the speed and depth controls only worked when vibrato was turned on. And we know James left his in chorus mode, so he was using the fixed settings in chorus mode. If you look at the JC120 head units, which James then shifted to using at least live for a while, they don't have vibrato at all. They have chorus and they have fixed or manual mode. So on those amps, you can adjust the speed and the depth of the chorus, but James also left it in the fixed mode position. And by looking at the schematic on those, you can see that the fixed mode was minimum speed, maximum depth. So that's what I'm rolling with. And I'm quite happy with that. I think it sounds great. I'm also using an IR of an electro voice speaker. And we know that that's what James preferred in his JC120s. So I'm assuming there's EVs in the one that he's using here. Now for the Univibe, I'm just using this vibe phaser from Avid. It's more of a Univibe type thing, but that's what the Rotovibe was trying to be anyway. So based on the settings that are detailed there, we're in chorus mode. We're at a pretty slow rate, and we've got the depth up between about 7 and 8 here. And I think that sounds just lovely. So combined with Twin, nice sound, right? Now for the real fun stuff. How the heck was I going to replicate a Roland VG8? The Effector Harmonitron, which is like a plug-in version of a POG, an EEH POG, was my best bet. Check that out. So this is really cool. And in order to get a consistent attack, because from what I remember about the Roland synths, they weren't the most dynamic units out there, and this is actually pretty dynamic, I ended up putting a Dynacomp in front of it. I thought, what's the most simple way to get a consistent sound into the front of that effect, and the Dynacomp made sense. Without it, some notes a little too strong. So again, not perfect. We don't know exactly what the patch that they use, it's called the organic patch on the Roland VG8, but it kind of sounds like an organ to me, so we're gonna roll with that. Then, we don't have a matchless Spitfire plugin, but I'm gonna use this Kiive Audio Lunchbox amp sim, which is kind of like, you know, a little Vox type of thing. So this is it with no speaker sim. I'm bypassing the cab. If I were to use, that's through their British Vox type cab, I guess. Not a lot of info on that there, but it sounds cool. So I'm trying to follow the settings. It doesn't seem like they were going for a lot of dirt from that particular amp. But then the real fun thing is this Roto speaker plugin from Avid has a rover setting. I keep going back and forth to which sound I like best. For this. Leave it on fast. Fast gives it a nice shimmer, which I think might be what they were looking for. Now I'm rolling with this down pretty low here. I've got these three signals, the twin, the jazz chorus, and the organ, all going into sort of a master. I'm calling this the dry bus. And I'm calling it the dry bus because I'm feeding quite a lot of the organ in particular to the, what I like to call the Bob Rock array of effects processors. The AMS-DMX, the EMT250, and the AMS-RMX. These three are the reason why I have a UAD system. And I realized if I was going to get serious about doing, you know, some of these Bob Rock productions, I needed all three of them because nothing else sounds quite right. So if I start to turn them on, you'll hear I'm feeding quite a lot of that organ sound to them. And I'm feeding a hint of the other guitars into them as well. But with that dry bus master, I can bring down the dry levels and still pump it into the reverb as much as I'd like. I've also got a little bit of compression on this dry bus. Just to kind of glue it all together a little. and the Studer 800. Now, is this 100%? No, it's not. I mean, we would really need the Roland VG8. At minimum, we'd need that unit to really get exact. But it was still a lot of fun trying to do this. I could sit here and play with this mix all day. And I keep going back and forth from, I think I got it, to, nah, not quite, you know. And bear in mind, we're hearing the original in mono. I don't have a stereo version of that sound. But all these, it didn't sound right without the reverbs or the DMX. The organ especially through the DMX. And my settings on that, this is the chorus doubler that Bob Rock has talked about at times. It's short delays, 27 and 35 millisecond delays with this chorus strip turned on. I never had the chance to use a real hardware chorus strip. I've used the AMS delay many times, but the chorus strips were super rare. So it's just fantastic that UAD incorporated that here. And it's a huge part of Bob Rock's guitar tones. And then EMT 250, I usually just start with the default mode and just tweak accordingly. And for RMX, I'm on non-lin here. Just a unique sounding reverb. Nothing quite like it. There's still something watery about that original that I can't quite nail. And I gotta think it's maybe due to not having that original VG8 patch. So anyway, if you've made it this far, I congratulate you. I'll send you some sort of badge of honor in the mail, and I appreciate it as always. So yeah, please let me know what you think. Again, not trying to match this tone exact, because I really think that would be impossible. But it was a lot of fun to try it from these load notes. And again, if you're an audio geek like me, those 4 pages are like a treasure trove. And hope you enjoyed them. And yeah, let me know if you guys are interested in me doing a video on the toms in particular with combining the microphones. I think that might be a lot of fun to do. And there's another Bob Rock trick that I also think you might dig with the toms, 4 toms actually. All right, well, until then, please like, comment, subscribe, and talk to you all soon. Take care.